So the debate I chose for my rebuttal was debate number 5, the role of the United Nations. And I am representing side B. Due to so many setbacks, the United Nations fails to be an effective world tool to combat political violence and protect human rights across the world. While conflict, climate change, and chaotic migration have reinforced the world's need for the United Nations, human rights system is at risk of abuse due to the many pressures arising from the current crisis. At the United Nations 71st session during the General Assembly, Canada's representative said exceptional and unique circumstances continue to erode the universal nature of human rights, a trend that often leads to greater inequality, injustice, violence, and death. Egypt's representative, too, also said the world was witnessing an escalation of human rights violations with huge numbers of people fleeing conflict and crossing borders. But countries failing to protect human rights were using related instruments, political aims at intervening in states' domestic affairs. Next, the politics surrounding human rights instruments were also addressed by India's representative, who noted that nearly half of the thematic mandate holders came from one region, while the reliance on voluntary funding to support the special procedure system privileged some mandates over others and could have adverse impacts on the perceived independence. He expressed concern that the United Nations rights machinery had divided states and was being used as a political tool. Events in Syria can be used to demonstrate these points. Excessive and disproportionate attacks against civilians, humanitarian, and healthcare personnel, and infrastructure must be brought to justice. Mass killings and other atrocities were also performed by Islamic State in Iraq and the Levant terrorists. Religious belief should not justify the use of terrorism and violence, and instead we should encourage religious leaders to do all in their power to prevent such acts. The one-size-all-fits approach cannot address human rights issues, as no people are exactly alike. No two societies, community states are exactly alike. Crises and exceptional or unique circumstances continue to erode the universality of human rights. The trend often leads to greater inequality, injustice, violence, and death. Impunity also is a major impediment to the realization of human rights and achievement of sustainable development, and concern has been expressed about a growing lack of recognition and appreciation for diversity, as well as an increasing number of restrictions imposed on civil society. However, during the 75th anniversary year of the UN, which happens to be this year of 2020, because of the centrality of human rights and all the United Nations does, and because all human rights are under assault, the Human Rights Council has taken notice of these acts of violence and disregard for human rights. Due to these setbacks comes the realization that human rights are our ultimate tool to help societies grow in freedom. As people are being left behind, fears are growing, divisions are widening, some leaders are exploiting anxieties to broaden those gaps to the breaking point. A perverse political arithmetic has taken hold, or the rule of law is being eroded. In so many places, people are rising up against political systems that fail to take them into account, and economic systems that fail to deliver prosperity for all. In the face of these tensions and tests, there is an answer: human rights. Human rights are the birthright of every person and in the interests of every country. They ensure stability, they build solidarity, they promote inclusion and growth. Sovereignty remains a bedrock principle of international relations, but national sovereignty cannot be a pretext for violating human rights. We must overcome the false dichotomy between human rights and national sovereignty. Human rights and national sovereignty go hand in hand. The promotion of human rights strengthens states and societies, thereby reinforcing sovereignty. A fundamental point comes in where just as we must not discriminate between people, we cannot pick and choose among human rights. When we push for a surge of diplomacy, we are reducing human suffering and promoting human rights. In order to do this, the United Nations and the countries within must work hand in hand with governments and other stakeholders, providing technical support to build national human rights institutions and guide the national application of international norms and standards. At other times, they must speak out, identifying both violations and violators. Success must be measured by the yardstick of meaningful change in people's lives. First, rights at the core of sustainable development. Second, rights in times of crisis. And third, gender equality and equal rights for women.